My name is Gordon Shadrack, and I'm an artist and educator based in Toronto, Canada. I am the lead artist and curator for the show Dismantle here at Spadina Museum. When I was doing my research for this exhibit, I learned a lot about how Toronto was an important place for people to arrive safely via the Underground Railroad. And what I also learned was that Toronto actually housed abolitionist meetings. At St. Lawrence Hall in the 1800s, they actually had meetings where people, both black and white, met to discuss how to get people safely from the US into Canada and to fight certain laws that were prohibiting people to getting into Canada safely. So this piece is called Scaffold, and this piece to me is very significant because the Toronto Raptors were involved. An important feature of this painting next to me is the fact that these three men are traveling at night. And I position them at night because to me, when you place black bodies at night, it changes the narrative of the story. But it also connects the idea of how people may have traveled via the Underground Railroad to Canada. They are wearing their championship jerseys from 2018, and what I think is most striking about this painting is the fact that they're helping a fallen brother. And I think that's what's really important, is that people understand that black people help each other up and we help support each other. And with this painting, my goal is to get people to recognize the work of the black abolitionists who fought hard to help people escape enslavement in the US and come to safety in Canada. One of the things that I like to focus in my paintings on is the way black bodies, particularly black men, are viewed in North American society. They can be revered as heroes when they're athletes, or when they're celebrities, or when they're, soldiers, but day to day on the street, we don't get the same sort of respect. The lens has shifted. And so by focusing on people like the Raptors, who in uniform and in play get the attention and the praise as athletes, that praise doesn't always translate to when you're on the street and out of uniform. I'm happy to be in this room right now because it actually does show the Raptors in uniform, but behind me you can also see a basketball net. The basketball net is constructed out of old seed and feed sacks that would have been used on farms. And to me, that represents how black bodies are used in labor and how they were used when they were enslaved. And what I hope to illustrate with that, and with the basketballs on the table that are too big for the holes of the pool table, that you can actually see that these are games that are impossible to win, that the rules of the game are always changing and working against us. But still, we find ways to overcome it and be successful. Right now, we are in a servant's room in the house. I felt it was important to acknowledge that no matter what the narrative, servants would be required in a house this size. I have an installation in place called sediment. I have whisk brooms in boxes with red sand, and the red sand represents the bloodlines of the Africans who would have come over to North America and how we see those bloodlines diminish over time. One of the themes that you'll see throughout this exhibit is the use of red. And specifically, there are red lines. There are red lines in some of the paintings. There are black shrouds over some paintings on the walls that have red lines on them. And the red lines were very important for me. Redlining was a term used to describe an act done by mortgage companies and banks which prohibited black people from buying homes and participating in the real estate market, which prohibited inherited wealth. Throughout the exhibit, the black shrouds that you'll see on top of certain paintings that have a red line on them exemplify the idea of erasure, the erasure of history. The portraits that I've covered are the portraits of the original homeowners, the Austins. And I wanted to cover them up because I wanted people to see what it's like when you know there's more to a story, but you don't have access to it. The erasure of black history, the fact that so much of it wasn't captured, wasn't discussed, wasn't written, the fact that so much of it has been attributed to mythology, that it's hard to prove facts, but we know there's evidence, but a lot of that evidence is hard to find. This painting beside me is called manifest, and it's an important painting to me for a number of reasons. One, it's the first painting that I completed for this exhibit, and what it showed me is that I could actually use the red lines in a way that was impactful. They sort of have a surrealistic effect. You can see Mrs. Pipkin planting 4 seeds into the soil. Each seed represents one of her 4 children. I chose okra as the seeds to be shown in this painting because okra is a very important crop in that it was brought to North America by enslaved people from Africa. We're standing in front of my painting of Mrs. Pipkin. This painting is called Refashion, and it's based on the painting that was done of her in the 1800s. So this is my reimagining of how she would look if she was the homeowner of this wonderful manor. In this portrait, she's sitting in front of an open sky. And the reason why I positioned her outside is because typically portraits of the lady of the house from this time period, the sitter would be positioned in front of something that displayed their wealth and knowledge and skill set. So for example, the portrait that this painting is based on, Mrs. Austin, the actual homeowner, she's sitting in front of a piano and she's holding sheet music. I felt that Mrs. Pipkin would be more humble about her situation and wouldn't necessarily want to display her wealth and power. This beautiful garment was designed and crafted by Tracy Gorman, who is a costumer for the City of Toronto. She created it for a performance that we had where an actress portrayed Mrs. Pipkin. I was totally in love with how she decided to base it on the portrait that I painted by using orange fabric and of course including the butterflies that I had in the portrait. Not much is known about Louisa Pipkin and her husband Jefferson. We do know they came from Maryland via the Underground Railroad to Toronto, and they made it here safely, where Mrs. Pipkin found work in this house. It is now known as the Spadina Museum, but back then it belonged to the Austin family, specifically James Austin, who was the founder of the Dominion Bank here in Canada. The Dominion Bank still exists, but is known as the Toronto Dominion Bank or TD Bank. We know that Mrs. Pipkin didn't live here. She lived in what is now known as Yorkville, and that she would have had multiple homes that she worked from. We are now in the kitchen, where I was tasked with the challenge of trying to create an installation piece that spoke to what being Black in Canada was like. And what I decided to do was to create an imaginary product line based on a Trinidadian Canadian chef named Roger Mooking, who participated in our project. What I did was I created these labels on these cans with Chef Roger on them. And each of the cans has a type of food that is consumed by people from the Caribbean, or food that may have been popular because of the colonization of the Caribbean. I really thought it was important to show how good representation on packaging can be shown. In the past, North Americans have included packaging that looks like this when they include Black people on the labels. This product, Negro powder, was produced in the 1900s, and it's unusual in that this is actually produced in Canada, specifically Quebec. But this shows how deeply ingrained racism is across North America. They're very dehumanizing, they reduce us to caricatures, and quite often are quite insulting. But usually they suggest that the product is hardworking, just like a Black person should be. I wanted to take away this indignity, and I wanted to show people that this is what you can do when you put a Black face on a label. It can be done with respect, it can be done with care, and most of all, it really reminds you that there's a real person behind the product.